Today's talk is about a very famous teaching that's really important to the Zen tradition primarily. A transmission outside of the sutras, not dependent on words and speech. A direct mind-to-mind transmission. So this sounds pretty exotic and kind of flowery, and I think it's meant to sort of alert people to pay attention or something like that. But my teacher was always very keen to emphasize how normal this direct mind-to-mind transmission is, that it doesn't require any special skill. And always the first example he would give, and I'm going to give this today, is a stand-up comedian. We have somebody like Chris Rock or Hannah Gadsby or Wanda Sykes, and they construct a joke. Maybe it's about racism, maybe it's about OCD, maybe it's about dating, we don't care, right? But we listen to the setup, and even though there's 1,000 people in the audience, the punchline, everybody laughs. So everybody's after thinking mind is different. White people, black people, old people, young people, men, women, everything in between. But everybody laughs at the same joke. So that's an example of direct mind-to-mind transmission. The comedian has looked deeply into their own heart, into their own consciousness, and they've seen the patterns, the stories, the prejudices, and then they construct the joke. Well, it's because our minds match the conditioned part of our mind that we laugh at the joke. If we don't get the joke, it's because we didn't have those same reference points. So of course, some jokes fly and some jokes don't. And the better comedians are usually refining the material in a workshop till they get only jokes that get a laugh, and then that becomes a show. Another example of a direct mind-to-mind transmission is, say, a man and a woman are married for a long time, 10, 15 years, they get to know each other. The man wants to give the woman a gift, so he thinks about her deeply, because he loves her. The woman, when she buys a tablecloth, she picks a tablecloth with lavender and green and maybe some peach in it. And then a few years later, she buys a dress, and the dress is peach colored and has a little green detail or a lavender detail. So the husband, he's shopping for his wife, and he sees a scarf, with lavender and green and maybe some peach, and thinks, he knows his wife's consciousness, so he buys the scarf. When he gives her the gift, she just opens the box. He doesn't say anything, except, here, this is for you. She sees the scarf. She doesn't have to say anything. It's a direct mind-to-mind transmission. She knows, my husband knows my taste. And he knows, this is my wife's taste, so I'll give her something that she's going to like. Maybe he doesn't even like these colors, but he sets aside his own I, my, me, and he just gives her the scarf. So she sees the scarf. No speech. There's no sutra. There's no explanation. It's just a connection like that. So there are 3 famous stories about times when the Buddha taught this way. And I'll try to quickly enumerate those for you. And I'll give you fairly short versions. So the first one's called In Front of the Pagoda of Many Children. So the many children part is a famous Brahmin who was very wealthy, had many wives. At that time, if you were rich, you could easily have multiple wives. And so he had lots of children and lots of grandchildren, and then he died. So he was Hindu. So his family, in honor of his great life, built this giant pagoda. That's just the setting for the Buddha's talk. So it's a case where the title of the story kind of has nothing to do with the story. It's just like 5100 East of Toledo. You know, it's just the address of the Dharma talk. So 1,200 monks are supposed to have assembled, monks and nuns, monastics, plus lay people, all for this talk by the Buddha. And the Buddha's been teaching for a while, and these monastics have all taken precepts. And the Buddha created a big rule, a very important rule. No matter your age, when you take the precepts, that is so important, that date becomes the most important date in relation to the rest of the community. So when you take a precept and then you come to the talk, if you took your precepts a long time ago, you sit in the front. And if you took your precepts maybe 5 years ago, you're in the middle. And if you took your precepts 6 weeks ago, you're in the back seat, all the way in the back. So Buddha created this rule to emphasize the importance of how rare it is for people to take precepts, walk away from their families, walk away from an industrious life, just dedicate their life to meditation and to begging, so that they're completely dependent on someone else. Now, we don't all do that, which is fine. I'm just describing the rule because it's the setup for what happens next. So Mahakashyapa was this very old Brahmin, older than Buddha, and he heard about the Buddha's teaching and he started being a follower of the Buddha, and the Buddha gave him precepts, but only about 2 months ago at the time of this talk. So there's a big assembly, Buddha's going to give a speech, so all indicators are the talk is going to start. And the Buddha's just sitting. And no one knows this, but Mahakashyapa is late. So everyone's wondering, why hasn't the Buddha begun his talk? It's just silence, so people are just waiting, wondering what's going to happen. Then Mahakashyapa arrives, and Buddha looks up, and their eyes lock. They see each other, and without missing a beat, Mahakashyapa walks up the main aisle. It's a big thing, you know, it's long. So everybody knows, hey, that guy just took precepts a few months ago. How come he's walking up to the front? Everybody's mind is moving. Is he going to sit in the very front? And he just recently took precepts. So some of these nuns and monks right in the front had taken precepts 10 years, 20 years, a long time ago. So Mahakashyapa is walking up, and then the Buddha moves over. And Mahakashyapa gets up and sits down right beside him. Everybody has a big question. It's a WTF, what the fuck is going on, yeah? Because this is a very formal group. The Buddha made this rule, and then Mahakashyapa broke it in front of everyone. So this teaching is the teaching of equality. Yeah, there are these rules, organizing our society, organizing our church groups, organizing precepts, blah, blah, blah. But our absolute nature is completely equal. Men and women are equal. Rocks and stones are equal to men and women. Animals in the sky and the trees are equal to us. The absolute nature that we have is shared with everything and is completely equal. So in Zen, you know, when you see me do this, that's a demonstration of the same point. Everything comes together in that point, and it's all equal. Even the floor vibrates. The floor is vibrating the same as your ear. The air is vibrating and my ear is vibrating. And that's how I perceive this is actually happening. Excuse me. Sorry. Supposed to be the floor. So that makes the same point. And the Buddha's making this point of equality, breaks his own rule, but no speech. Very interesting. The next occasion, where the tradition points to this kind of teaching outside of the sutras without words and speech, is at Vulture Peak, the talk at Vulture Peak. And when I first heard this, I was trying to sort of put it together in my head, and I remembered the Maharishi and the Beatles from the 70s. I don't know if you guys remember that. But in the media, there were lots of photographs of the Maharishi and the Beatles all beside him and their girlfriends and wives, and then all these flowers, tons and tons of flowers as a kind of sign of reverence or appreciation for his teaching. So I think it was a case like that. I think people had piled flowers in front of where the Buddha sat. He wasn't the same style teacher, but that's how they treated teachers in those days, sometimes. So again, it's Mahakashyapa, only this time he is sitting in the back where he belongs. So he's all the way in the back. If you read the story, it says 1,200 monastics are in the assembly. I don't know if that's completely true, but that's how the story goes, right? And the Buddha settles in. All indications are the talk is going to start, and he doesn't begin talking. He just sits. And again, everyone's wondering, what's going on? We're here for a talk, and the Buddha's not giving a talk. 1 minute goes by, 3 minutes go by, 5 minutes go by. No one's meditating, everyone's just wondering, why isn't the talk starting? Then the Buddha bends over, he picks up a flower and holds it up. No one understands what he's doing except for Mahakashyapa. All the way in the back, big smile. Now, the teaching is finished at that point. Buddha held up a flower, nobody knew what to do. Mahakashyapa has a big smile. He saw the flower. That's all that's happening, right? So Buddha's mind and Mahakashyapa's completely come together, just like the husband and the wife, just like the stand-up comedian and the audience. That's the whole teaching. Now, Buddha says something. I don't have this memorized. Let's see if I can find it. I'll paraphrase. He says something like, I give to you the formless Dharma, the unspeakable something, something, something. My teacher would always say that becomes a big mistake. There's like a picture of a snake, which is complete. There's just a picture of a snake, but Buddha came along and he drew legs on it. Like snakes don't have legs, but he added something unnecessary. Also, snakes don't need legs. So that's like our poetic way of saying, just holding up the flower, Mahakashyapa smiling. This was Buddha's Dharma, and Mahakashyapa's Dharma matched, completely connected. So not dependent on words and speech. Buddha is teaching without using words, and he's asking his students, if you don't get it in the beginning, don't worry. Just keep practicing, and then you'll see your own mind. And when we see our own minds, then we can see the content of our minds. Those are two different things. And the more we're able to see one, the more we're able to feel and see the other. Then the third occasion of the Buddha teaching this way was at his death. He had died. He had been fed some either bad meat when he was collecting alms, or was poisoned. There's lots of versions to that story. Buddha was in his 80s, maybe 83. He eats his food and he gets food poisoning, and it takes him 2 or 3 days to die. He says he does some teaching right before that happens. So then they build a big funeral pyre, and this very rich Buddhist person makes a giant donation of a gold casket, and a big strong gold casket, and they put the Buddha in it on top of all this wood. Now, news of Buddha's death is traveling, and our old hero, Mahakashyapa, is not in town. He's way out of town teaching in the mountains. So it takes 3 or 4 days for the news to get there, and then it takes 3 or 4 days for Mahakashyapa to come to the funeral site. Well, in India, it's very warm, and now there's a dead body in a fancy gold coffin, and everyone has assembled for the funeral, but there's no Mahakashyapa, and he's the senior student. So they're waiting. And they start to worry, oh, 1 day, 2 days, 7 days. Now a bad smell will appear. All this is really bad form. In Hinduism, it's a bad idea to let somebody sit that long without taking care of business. So Mahakashyapa appears. He bows to the Buddha's coffin, and then he circumambulates the pyre. So he walks counterclockwise around the whole thing. When he gets back to his original starting point, boom! The Buddha's feet break out of the bottom of the coffin and stick outside. So this is some kind of incomprehensible miracle or demonstration. Also, the Buddha's followers were all thinking, when he died, they were sad and grieving, but then usually sages live to be 120. Usually really wise people don't die so young. They start checking, maybe this wasn't the best teacher. Also, he has special energy, and was completely enlightened, so why didn't he just cure his body and keep teaching us? So many kind of checking mind thoughts about this teacher who now body has died. So these feet pop out of the coffin, there's this big sound, according to the story, and everybody realizes, oh, only the Buddha's body died. He is still alive, his teaching's still alive. So everybody's mind becomes clear. And again, it's a teaching of no speech. I guess you had to be there. Then they light the funeral pyre, burn the whole thing up. Good. So that last point is teaching function. I missed a point in this talk. So the first one teaches substance, the equality of all things. The second one teaches truth. So when Buddha holds up a flower, and you see me do this all the time, we hold up the stick, and then so can you see this? That's truth. You can see it. I can see it. I can hear that. You can hear that. This is the Buddha's teaching outside of words, outside of the sutras, pointing directly to mind. So you can see it, you can hear it. So your mind is working. And also you're a human being. If there were a cat or a dog or maybe a bird up in the ceiling, they may not pay so much attention to the stick. Also, the walls and the floor aren't really paying attention. They're experiencing the sound, but they aren't aware. They don't have consciousness like we do. So Buddha is teaching just that. Just notice your ability to perceive. Become aware of your direct experience. And that's Buddha's teaching. That's his mind. When we are clear, when we see the truth, then our relationship to it becomes clear, and then our function is possible. This function is always spontaneous. And in the last example, Buddha's feet banging out of the coffin, that's his function. His body's function spontaneously addresses the issue. So in the Zen tradition, we look at the first demonstration of equality. The second is a demonstration of truth. And the third story is a demonstration of function. All of these are out. I've given, I've been talking now 20 minutes. That seems like a lot of explanation and storytelling. That's another contradiction that's always built in. Because we'll all say, well, this teaching is outside of the sutras, not dependent on words and speech. But I've been using a lot of all those. However, It's the correct function of words and speech once we're rooted in our before-thinking mind. Because when we practice, Buddha taught many ways to practice, but when we meditate, we practice the way he practiced. The first thing he did was sit and sit and sit. He trusted that. That led to his insight into the nature of being a human being and no separation with this whole world. From that, he saw the truth and then his relationship to it, which was just to teach us. Trust that. Always trust your direct experience. So when some suffering appears, maybe it's because of someone else's thinking, maybe it's because of our own thinking, we just trust our direct experience, which is sitting in the chair. We find our breath. We perceive the experience of being alive. When we look at that mind, then there's some space between the suffering and our actual experience. And that spaciousness is where wisdom can appear. Our intuition can appear. So it isn't that Buddhism disrespects words and speech. It knows how valuable they are, but instead of words and speech coming first and then wisdom coming second, it's the other way around. Now, for me personally, this was extraordinarily difficult teaching. I was raised really from the age of 4 or 5 to use understanding to end suffering. If I was in a conflict with a sibling or a conflict with my school, it was pounded into me, follow these rules, understand this situation, and then your suffering will go away. And it often did. So that teaching was reinforced. Oh, I follow all these rules, then the suffering goes away. I break these rules, I use my understanding to get out of the suffering. Yeah, and I think it's like that for most people. However, this is not the whole picture of the human condition. The whole picture of the human condition is those rules are empty, they have a limited use, but they aren't the whole. And our consciousness is not just our understanding, it's our experience. So for true wisdom to appear, we've got to learn how to tap our direct experience and trust that. Then our own wisdom, our own Buddha light shines on the problem and we know what to do. And sometimes just by cultivating our own Buddha mind, the problem just disappears. Yesterday, a bunch of circumstances I was in changed. And suddenly this very unpleasant feeling, like anxiety/depression, huge, just came on. And maybe 30 years ago this would happen to me, but it hadn't happened to me in a long time. And it was about time to go for a walk, and I didn't want to go for the walk, I didn't want to do anything. Like, all my natural impulse just came to a standstill. And I went, what is this? And, oh, familiar, oh, I remember this. So then I just practiced. I just welcomed it in. What is this? And it was really unpleasant. It was just anxiety and depression and like grief and completely incoherent. Like no words, no explanation. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what was going on. But I just trusted, don't know. Well, what's next? Oh, I was going to go for this walk, like my doctor tells me to go. So I just go for a walk. 5-10 minutes later, the whole thing vanished. Just as quickly as it came on, incoherently, and it vanished incoherently. Like, I still don't have an explanation, but I don't need one. I just trusted my direct experience, and whatever my consciousness was making about whatever reaction to the circumstances that had changed, I just didn't follow it. So that's the bulk of the talk. Thank you so much for your attention and listening. That is your true nature.